and a concrete dome built in the previous century to contain radioactive waste from atomic bomb tests on Inuiatek in the Marshall Islands is leaking radioactive material out into the Pacific. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the dome structure as a kind of coffin and said it was a legacy of Cold War-era nuclear tests out in the Pacific. While Guterres did not offer an immediate solution, he did say the Pacific's history of nuclear contamination needed to be addressed. So to further discuss this, we're being joined now by Kevin Kamps, a radioactive waste specialist with Beyond Nuclear. Mr. Kamps, thanks for being with us today. So this is something that not a lot of people talk about anymore. They prefer to kind of keep it as part of the past, but it's coming back to bite us now. What are the ecological impacts of the leak in the Pacific Ocean, as well as on the local inhabitants of like the Marshall Islands and other Polynesians?
Right. Well, the Marshallese certainly haven't forgotten. So, I mean, just one hydrogen bomb blast in 1954 performed by the United States. It was called Castle Bravo, code name. The biggest nuclear bomb the United States ever exploded, 15 megatons, 1,000 times bigger than Hiroshima, caused a massive radioactive contamination catastrophe across the Pacific. And so this dome that is failing to contain the radioactive waste that was dumped in that pit is haunting us still, you know, but other countries, Russia, the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, for example, in the Arctic Ocean, there are similar stories in Kazakhstan. So all of the nuclear weapons powers have these horrific tales that they're responsible for.
So this is kind of dotting our planet from this Cold War era experimentation that we were conducting. Can you explain how this leak and contamination is the result of the nuclear arms race from the Cold War?
Right, so they did some level of cleanup, so-called, and they dumped it in this pit, and then they covered the pit with a concrete dome. And it's not a magical material, it's concrete, and maybe it's steel reinforced with rebar, which is the seeds of its own destruction. When the rebar corrodes, it eats its way out of the concrete. And they didn't even line the pit. So there's probably water exchange with the ocean just from the bottom of this pit. And this is one, like you said, of countless sites across the world that are failing with age. And here we are on the brink of a new Cold War, essentially, with talk of, you know, modernizing nuclear weapons arsenals. So we need to learn from these terrible lessons from the past, and people like the Marshallese have borne the brunt of these nightmares.
Well, is there really any real way to contain the waste?
It's very challenging. Radioactive waste that's artificially generated by nuclear weapons production, these test blasts by nuclear power with high-level radioactive waste, these are artificial poisons that never existed on the Earth before 1942, when Enrico Fermi fired up the first atomic reactor as part of the Manhattan Project. And to this day, since 1942, we still haven't solved the first cupful of high-level radioactive waste that he generated in Chicago.
How would you compare this to the disaster in Fukushima? I mean, we know, I'm from the West Coast, and we know there was a lot of waste that showed up in California.
Right. So all of the fallout from atmospheric nuclear weapons testing and a third of the underground tests leaked to the environment. They just didn't tell us for 50 years that had happened. When Fukushima happened, it took a very short period of time, just a year or two, for the plume in the ocean to reach the west coast of North America. It doubled the radioactive cesium contamination levels in seawater on the west coast from all of the atmospheric bomb tests. Fukushima doubled that. Fukushima is ongoing. It has daily releases into the ocean.
Now, a lot of people might be hearing, you know, Polynesian islands, Marshall Islands, it's some faraway place. Japan, some faraway place. Closer to home, Hanford nuclear site in Washington State, dangerous contamination events uncovering this week. How stable truly then is nuclear power? Should we continue to focus our energy on something that's part of, you know, historically something we didn't use anyway?
Well, we should be learning these lessons. Hanford was a nuclear weapons site. What they're trying to do is take liquid high-level radioactive waste and re-solidify it, and that process has not gone well. They're screwing up left and right. Workers are getting contaminated. And then nuclear power, it is not the answer, no matter what the question is. As a solution for climate change, it costs too much, it takes too long, it has a mile-long list of problems all its own. We have to learn from these mistakes from the past and not make them all over again. And the Green New Deal, the Sunrise Movement in the United States, has taken a strong position that they do not see nuclear power as any kind of solution for the climate crisis.
Give us an example, lastly, of what happens to people when they are met with this kind of contamination in their body.
Well, high-level radioactive waste can kill you within seconds or minutes if you don't have radiation shielding. But then the lower-level radioactive contamination,
these slow leaks,
like erupted out of Chernobyl. There's this mini-series on HBO right now showing the horrific effects of the contamination. To this day, 33 years later, there are dead zones around Chernobyl, and it should be much bigger than it is.
Meaning things don't grow and people are affected how?
Incredibly enough, well, you've got cancer, you've got birth defects, you've got genetic damage, and incredibly enough, there are forests in the Chernobyl region that won't decompose. They're called zombie forests. It's because the microbes and the insects that should be decomposing the dead wood aren't there. They're missing from the ecosystem. These are tinder boxes for wildfires, and when those wildfires happen every year, they put the radioactivity back up in the air and it blows further downwind.
Fascinating and scary stuff. Kevin Kamps, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.